All right, I think we'll get started. Welcome to Podcasting 101. My name's Emily, and I am with both Under the Library and Up Your RPG. You'll hear a little more about those from Arthur on the end. And this evening, I think this is an opportunity for you to pick the brains of these experienced podcasters. So I will be asking them questions, but I hope that you will take the opportunity to raise a hand and ask a question if you have one, whenever. You don't have to wait until the end. Okay? So I think I would love to just have you all introduce yourselves to get started. We don't have to go right down the table for every question, but this one, I'd love to just hear about you and your podcast for the audience.
Where do we start?
You're first.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
You're in the hot seat.
Oh, yes. So I'm Ludovic, aka Ludo, and I run a podcast called the God Learners Podcast, which is a podcast about Glorantha. I would have made a podcast about Call of Cthulhu, but I had my midlife crisis a bit later than those guys, maybe, so it was already...
Wow, starting out strong.
Wow.
But yes, podcast about Glorantha.
Hi, I'm Mike Diamond. I'm the keeper of the Always podcast, and we mainly at this point focus on Call of Cthulhu and a few other tales to come.
I'm Seth Skorkowsky. I'm technically a podcaster with the Modern Mythos podcast, where we talk about just investigative horror games. Mostly, I think why I'm here is because I'm also a YouTuber with the highly imaginative name channel Seth Skorkowsky, where I just talk about different role-playing games in general. So, and then been on a couple of different streaming podcasts, How We Roll, Glass Cannon, and stuff like that. So that's me.
I'm Arthur, and I produce Up Your RPG and Under the Library. Under the Library is a Call of Cthulhu actual play. Up Your RPG is a show where we sort of meta-analyze individual aspects of role-playing and help folks get more narrative in their own TTRPGs. And apparently I'm having my midlife crisis as a much older guy.
Didn't you know? So I said we wouldn't do this, but we're going to go back down the line because I want a little more information from all of you.
Yeah.
Art, thank you for telling me a little about what the podcast is, but it would be great if you could tell me if you're playing, if you're reviewing, if you're giving feedback or discussion or analysis. How many are you, just you, or do you have a group? Give us a little picture of what is going out every episode.
Sure. So for Under the Library, it is an actual play Call of Cthulhu show. I'm the producer. Michael is our keeper. He's here somewhere. I just saw him. He's over there somewhere. And we have a total of 5 players now. I'm one of those players as well. Up Your RPG, there are 3 of us in the core group. It's myself, Emily, and Michael. And again, we take a different topic about TTRPGs and improving narrative and discuss those. Emily is our moderator for that show. Kind of keeps us under control and then summarizes at the end. Yeah. Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent.
Yeah. I was waiting for laughter.
That's a point for me.
That's okay. So Seth, could you just elaborate a little bit on, just in case anyone doesn't already know what you do?
Okay, well, with the Modern Mythos podcast, it's me and John Hook, who's written a ton of scenarios for Call of Cthulhu. And it's mostly us just BSing, man. It's like real low key, but we'll have kind of behind the scenes. We've got 2 more that will do some of the editing and some of the sound cleanup because, audio. And then with my YouTube channel, it's literally just me by myself, and I'll cover review. Closer. Am I not projecting enough? I'll cover different tabletop RPG reviews, philosophies, and sometimes just stupid videos over funny, goofy stuff.
So it's good you have someone doing your audio.
Evidently. But not on that. That's just me.
And Mike?
So The Old Ways is a podcast that has anywhere between 13 to 16 cast members, 3 campaigns. We play Call of Cthulhu. We play Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition. We play Delta Green and a smattering of other smaller run non-campaign storylines. So that could be anything from Alien, to a couple different Free League products, Coriolis. We've played Vaesen, and I do we'll just say a majority stock of the editing and post-production. And I have some help on the 5th edition side with Vampire because that's Rena's game, and she's doing all of they're doing all of their own editing, which is helpful for me because there's only so many hours in the day.
Yeah. So clarify for me, do you have 3 at the same time, 3 campaigns going, or you mean you have 3 published?
Yes, three at the
So
same time.
you're not busy at all.
No, not at all. We released 141 episodes last year, and averaged a new episode for your listening ear every 2.5 days.
Holy smokes.
Okay.
We release between
props to you.
12 to 14 episodes a month.
Okay. Wow. And Ludo, what about you?
So me and my co-host Jörg, who is in Germany, so he's not here. We basically talk about Glorantha, so it's not an actual play podcast, talk podcast. Glorantha is a Bronze Age fantasy world that has been featured in many things, from video games like King of Dragon Pass and 6 Ages to role-playing games like RuneQuest and Quest Worlds and stuff like that. And there's even another video game coming up, I think. But it's notoriously old and very complicated. Not complicated, but there's a lot of material that has been written on it. So our goal is to sort of talk about it in a sort of open way, hopefully accessible way. And another thing is that it's got a very thriving community of content creators. If you look at Drive-Thru RPG, the overall top-selling community books, generally half of the top 10 is actually Glorantha PDFs. And so we try to get those creators on the show. So we always have a guest, which is either a creator or somebody who's involved in the Glorantha community, and we give them some spotlight. We talk about nerdy stuff, and then I have to do some editing and push it on the web.
So you follow what's new, where it's coming out in different media or different, or do you go back and you explain?
Yeah, no, we pick
everything.
Various topics about the world, or about sometimes it is actually about some news, some book came out on Drive-Thru and we invite the author and we nerd out about it. But other times we just pick another old thing and we talk about it with some member of the community that is passionate about that topic. So.
And you're working on 2 continents, which has to
yes, and
add its own level of complication.
And there is a fair number of the Glorantha community which is in Australia, so we have to coordinate between Canada, Germany, and Australia when we have those guests. But yeah, it's fun.
Okay, wow. All right, well, I won't promise because that's dangerous, but I think that's the last time I make you go down the line and answer all of my questions in succession. But I'm just going to pose you some questions, and if you feel inclined, please share your thoughts. So let's do a little background. How did you get into podcasting? How and when did you get started? Why did you decide to do this?
I can start actually, because I already said it's my midlife crisis, and there was COVID, and I was at home, so yeah, so that's pretty much it. Also, it's around the time I got into Glorantha as a setting. That's when I discovered it, and I figured hey, it's cool. There is no podcast about Glorantha, and I'm gonna make one. It's still a niche topic.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna say a boutique podcast.
That's a fancy boutique.
Exactly. Yes. But that's when
You
it
did
happened.
have a midlife crisis. Boutique.
Exactly. But so yeah, it's happened around 2020. So yeah.
Okay.
I'm going to skip the line. Somebody else can answer so that we break this
Yes.
Yes.
That's a good call.
strange snake up.
Okay.
I mean, I can just call on you.
I started a podcast because John Hook asked me to join a podcast with him.
Which is totally
That's a
reasonable.
good reason.
That was it.
Yep.
That was he said I didn't have to edit, because any other time anybody asked me to do a podcast, it was it'll be great, we'll do all this stuff and then you can edit it. And I'm like, do you have any idea what that step entails? And so he came in and was like, hey, we're bringing an editor in. I was like, John, you're the first person out of like 30 that have asked me to do a podcast with you that I'll say yes to, because you understand what it means from the technical side. Since I work from home, I'm self-employed, people just assume I've got all the time in the world to do all the crappy stuff. So that's how I actually got into podcasting.
Yeah. So you got in because somebody asked you, but you stayed because they understood how much work it actually is and supported you.
Correct.
Is that fair?
Because I had my YouTube channel going on. So I was like, dude, I'm like busy with technical stuff already. I don't need to be doing that. And he knew that coming in. So that's how.
Well, good. Anybody else feel like
Yeah, I knew how much work it was going to be, and no one convinced me to do it. I was stupid all on my own. So I started about 12 years ago in podcasting. I had a science-based podcast that went nowhere, and then a politics thing. Since then, I started engineering my wife's podcast, which is actually wildly successful. She talks about birth and childbirth education. And I teach podcasting to 7th and 8th graders. And then we started this show about 2 years ago. And then the second show, actually just after Chaosium last year, based on one of the talks that we gave at last year's Chaosium, Up Your RPG was born in the car on the way home from that trip.
Yeah. As we said in a session earlier today, it ended up being not just a place to share all of our problems with the world, but then hopefully learn from them.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, so I started around 2019, give or take. I decided that I too wanted to inflict a lot of self-harm to myself, and got into the editing business. And that's really where it started. It started around my dining room table. That's where the Old Ways podcast started, was me and my friends having the sheer audacity to believe that other people would want to hear what we were doing. Yeah. And so there is some ego that cannot be removed from podcasting. You are eventually, in some way, believing people care what you say, or if nothing else, you believe that you're entertaining enough to entertain people, so they forget that you don't know what you're talking about.
That's my trick.
It's working out very well.
That last part is crucial.
Yeah. So that's really where we started. It's just the sickness has gotten worse.
So I'm getting that podcasters are masochists.
A little bit.
Yeah. I think tortured artist is better.
Tortured artist. I like that.
I think tortured artist, but yeah.
Okay. Awesome. So tell me a little bit about your audience, about who listens, what kind of interaction you have with them, and even if you've noticed a development over the time you've been podcasting.
Can I answer from the YouTube side?
Sure.
We only do a podcast. Sure. Okay. A significant part of every day of mine is interacting with commenters. That's since I'm a one-man show and I have 110,000 subscribers, I get non-stop comments, especially after a fresh video. When I was smaller, I got a lot more of the jerks. I think with smaller channels, people see that as low-hanging fruit. If this is somebody I can come and just be a jerk to. And then, so it's basically you have to once you hit 1,000 subscribers, they're like, oh, let's pick on this guy. And then I think around the time I hit 50, that all those people went away because I was big enough that they felt like maybe they couldn't just be a jerk to me all day. So that's happened. I don't know, my audience has kind of evolved because I try to hit a lot of different games and I try to rotate those games. So it's a lot of very, very new people who are just learning a system or learning tabletop games, as well as a ton of old grown-yards who are, I'll talk about a Traveler thing from 1982, and they're like, I bought that day it came out when I was in 7th grade, and somebody's finally talking about it after 40 years. So I've kind of got the whole spectrum.
So you find you get both ends of that spectrum with the same episode, with the same content, or does it tend to go back and forth?
Well, a lot of them it ends up being the same, because I'll talk about a brand new adventure if I'm reviewing it, and I'll talk about an old adventure with the exact same stress on it. I don't make a bigger deal if it's old or new, except for if it's impossible to find because it's out of print and there's no PDFs anymore. But so I pretty much will get the wide range.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I was just asking, if you talk about a given game, I guess you get the new people who have never encountered it, plus the old people who had loved it in the 80s. So the way you're presenting it is accessible to both.
I try to be, the term is evergreen. So it's none of it is where like, we're talking about this thing that's only happening this month. It's more of like, if it's 3 years later and you come across this video, I want it to be just as helpful as if it was for day one. And I have found that when I do talk about a new game, I will get a little bit of initial pushback because people are like, well, I came to you because you talked about, Traveler or Call of Cthulhu, and now you're talking about, Cult or this wuxia game you're doing lately. And then they start coming around, or they realize that just because I have one or two people say they don't care, it doesn't mean I'm going to stop.
Right.
So,
Yeah. It's a great point. I think for our content, we get an awful lot of very similar reactions where the audience built up slow. A lot of it geographically as a podcast was at first very local, and then pockets begin to grow across the U.S. And eventually, for us, when we took on the second campaign, when we took on Orient Express, there was a much larger bump from it because there weren't as many APs of it out. And so people were asking like, okay, well, has anybody played this recently? Because the thing has been out of print since how or when. And, the last time it was a box set, bad things happened. So who's actually playing it? And so since we got a big jump out of Europe. And then oddly enough, Japan suddenly grabbed hold that we were playing Horror on the Orient Express. And we couldn't get enough feed. Like they just kept listening and listening and listening. And that's fantastic. And we have no Japanese speakers on the cast. So it was nice to have an audience from different places. Oddly enough, in the recent, say, 6 to 8 months, we've had a steady audience in Ukraine, which is fantastic, right? So if you're hearing my voice and potentially seeing this face, or any of these faces, if you're listening in Ukraine, thank you. Thank you for existing and still continuing to listen, because that's unbelievable.
Thank you for that. Are we happy with that question?
Yeah, we can't compete with that.
Can't compete with that. Okay.
I wouldn't ask you to. Ooh, hands.
Yeah, I was going to say, I asked you to ask questions, and I've been focused on our
hit
wonderful panelists. So let's start right here in the middle.
Hi, Joel Bergen. I got a very podcast 101 question.
Yeah.
I've done a podcast watch if you don't want to. But you go, how do I do podcasts? And
Ooh, danger.
Yep.
days researching it, come up with 1,000 different tools, and I'm like, no, I'm not. So, and I don't actually know anybody who can say, well, use this, that, and the other thing. So, some of you have been at this for years, some of you are newer, but is there any set of tools that you've settled on or would recommend, or even just a website that will guide a newbie through it, like maybe you're teaching 7th and 8th graders? What's a good technical tool for recording, for editing, for uploading, a good hosting site, whatever you might add? Do you all use?
Yeah, so I think that my situation with teaching my students is a very different thing than what I would tell someone like you. With my students, I'm talking more about how to find a story that you're interested in, that you think is compelling, and find a way to tell that story. We're far less interested in gear and hosting and those sorts of things. For them, it's how to get a group of kids on the same page and telling one compelling story. For that, just in case you're curious, I use a digital recorder and a few of this exact same mic.
And what is that mic, Art?
This is the Shure SM58. That is the Shure SM57. And actually, personally, and I'm sure there are a lot of different opinions about this. In fact, I know there are. You saw them on Google. I think this is one of the great sort of steps in your arc of gear. And I look at that arc of gear on an axis of cost to performance. You will go up in performance quite a bit as you start to go up in cost, and then you're going to tail off significantly. Yep. And I think that the first tail off is at $100 at this mic. You drop off quite a bit, and then you go up at the next step which is you see it everywhere on Twitch and on YouTube, which is the Shure SM7B. Is that right?
Yeah, that's the mic that we use.
That's the mic that the vast majority of the sort of pro podcasters use. The interesting thing, if you do some digging, the capsule inside that microphone is the exact same capsule that's inside this one. And it's $400 versus $100. There are a lot of differences elsewhere in there. But as a sort of, if you want to get to that pro level, this with a decent interface is a great way to start. Hosting services, there's a million of them, but that one I wouldn't recommend one over another. There's a bunch of them. But the other question is, are you recording in a group of people who are in the same space together, or are they remote? Because that's a very different equation as well. Then you've got audio routing issues and software recording versus hardware recording. It gets complicated. I'd be happy to talk to you offline because it'll bore the crap out of everybody else.
Microphone and mixer setup or external microphone for one of these.
So, and that that's the other part of it is that there is a school of thought that you're not a real podcaster unless you've spent a certain amount of money, which I personally do not buy. I think there's certainly an aspect of you need your audio to be at a point where it's not annoying and so bad that nobody's going to listen to it. But I also think that content is the most important thing in your show, and that equipment is secondary. Work on your content first and figure out your equipment and your process as you're working out your content would be my advice.
Thanks. Thank you very much. Does anyone else have anything to add? Any different equipment experiences?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we are much lower tech on my podcast, but I want to mention mostly that, for example, for us, because we mostly work with guests that are not podcasters or streamers or anything, we'll always have one lower quality voice anyway in the podcast, and that's the guest, which is most of the airtime if we do our job well. So instead, what I did was more research a bit more into the DAW, the DAW, like digital audio workstations, and sort of so it's the software that you use to do the editing, and then figure out a few simple tricks for cleaning up the sound of the guests, mostly because, like, for example, I have a proper mic, but and so that's where I put my effort, because you can't tell the guests, before you come on the show, please buy this $100 mic. So.
Right. Yeah.
Yes, here's the gatekeeping. Please, if you want to be on the podcast, spend $150 and sound like one of us. It won't work. So,
especially if it's a guest that you only invite for one.
Right, for one episode.
Yeah, we just need to talk to you for 15 minutes or so. Do you mind spending $150 to do that? Yeah. So from our aspect, things are a little different, but I completely agree with a lot of the tenets that have been espoused here, and the reason is because the podcasting industry is very much gatekept by the amount of money you're willing to spend.
Yep.
And so there are people out there, even though I have a studio full of 7Bs, will say, well, Mike, the Neumann is better.
Right.
Well,
Exactly.
It's a $3,300 mic.
Right. Yeah.
It had better be better. But the question is it actually better enough where you can, after rack processing, after all the editing and post-production, can you really tell the difference? I mean, maybe. Is that difference worth $2,700? Not to me.
Yeah.
So that's really the thing that I would think of. And I guess, where would you start? This is what I would do. I would download a free program, and I would start, not finish, but start with Audacity. Mm-hmm. And what I want you to do is open your mouth and say things. Learn how your voice goes through the mic and understand how the waves as they react when you say words. Get used to figuring out where your distance from the mic needs to be. Mm-hmm. Right? If you're going to have to look into the camera for an interview, adjust for that, because you're going to have to learn all of that physical part of your body as you address the mic. That's really important. It can keep you from having too many plosives. It can keep you your editing time a little bit further down. Mm-hmm. And also, you'll be able to hopefully eventually use your voice in certain ways to get across specific points. And that is something on a podcast that your listener can hear. They can hear the differences in those values.
Yeah, and those average listeners are not going to hear the difference between those two mics that you illustrated earlier.
we have a
They don't
cast
care.
member, we have a cast member who records from home sometimes, and she uses roughly a 58 mic, just like this one, a little bit of a variant of one, and she sounds fine because the space that she's in isn't professionally treated, but the mic's in the right part of the room. She addresses the mic correctly where it needs to be, and there is no external noise. That's all I need.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need her to have a $400 mic. It's not necessary.
Yeah, and you hit on something else that I was going to ask about, which is just where do you record? Do you sit in your bedroom? Do you have a studio? I mean, there are a whole range of sit around the dining room table.
Yeah, so as I said, the old way started at my dining room table, but it is now in the basement, which is where my recording studio is. Okay. So that's a little bit different of a game now, where we have acoustically treated walls and baffles and tables and, articulated arms for all the microphones, the studio rack, all that stuff. It's an entire production, much to many of my family's chagrin, of course.
And how many years did it take you to get to that point?
We moved into the basement during the pandemic, so season 3 of England, so that's like 2021, I think.
Yeah.
So we've been down there for a couple of months, and then attached to the studio, my personal recording office is different. That's a 9x14 room that has carpeted floors and has bookshelves all over the place, and so I don't do any sound treatment in that room because the sound doesn't go anywhere, and I don't need to worry about it. So it takes time and effort, right? But nobody's going to expect you to have a $500 mic out of the gate, and if they do, they're just not being fair to the experience of everyday people. And like he's mentioned, you don't need it. It's not required.
Yes, right here in the front.
So kind of stepping away from equipment and looking towards your cast, did you guys like specifically vet everyone, or did you just kind of start with whoever was at your table? How did you pick up new players? Did you break up with any old ones?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. Did you break up with
This
any old
audience
players?
is taking my whole
we did
list.
not. It's
You guys
funny.
are
We
good.
were just talking about this in our previous seminar. When we started, it actually started with our game group. And one day I realized, I was like, holy shit, we're good at this. We should record it. And I talked to our keeper and threw out the idea. And as we were discussing, okay, who would be in this campaign with us that we're going to record? And we listed all these names and we put it out to a group of people and everybody said, yeah, I'm in. And I went, oh shit, that's way too many people. There were 6 players and a GM. So 7 people on this thing. And I actually said, that's too many. We got to get rid of somebody. We can't have this many people on a show. You're not going to hear from people. And Michael said, no, we can't do that. We got to keep everybody. And we kind of went back and forth for quite a while. We wound up keeping everybody. And it's a bit of a long story, but it wound up being great for us in the end. But it was definitely very much we have this existing group. We want to record it. It wasn't, we want to make a podcast. How do we do that?
Okay. And I guess we have the largest recording group on the stage right now, except you have many casts. Mike, I don't know
Yeah,
how your casts came
depends
together.
on how technical do you want to get about it. So during the crossover episode between Masks of Nyarlathotep and Horror on the Orient Express, there were 13 cast members in the same show,
Holy crap.
which is a hell of an edit.
Yeah, that
But
sounds terrible.
Our mask crew is 6 to 7, depending upon what's going on. And then Horror on the Orient Express is a secure 5, an amazing 5. The VTM show is 6, so roughly between.
Well, so how did all of these people come together for you?
Okay, so the brief version of that is just for time's sake, because you can catch me at the bar later while I'll tell you a fuller story. I was playing Star Wars, the West End game edition, an amazing, fun edition, and I had gotten it. I've been writing novels at the time about mythos stories set in the 20s. A very close rip from the Indiana Jones style of stories that are pretty prevalent in pulp novels. And I kept remembering, look, I played Call of Cthulhu years ago. It would be fun to go back to that. And so I kind of flipped the table over, so to speak, in the setting, and I began casting for the Call of Cthulhu not as a podcast, just as a game. And I told the folks who were interested, hey, let's get together and let's talk. And that's become what is the main core of the Mask show, which is our first show from 2019. I've played with them for anywhere between 10 to 20 years already. So it's baked into the cake that we have a lot of that same understanding of how each other plays their characters, how people move, all that stuff. If it seems like, wow, it's show one, these guys are, I mean, the audio's not great, but they know each other. Well, yeah, because we've been playing together for 15 so years. So yeah, we know each other. But the alternate point, and sort of the complete flip on that, is being on the Good Friends of Jackson Elias Discord server. So if you're a Call of Cthulhu fan and you're a Discord person and you're not there, you totally should be. I give them the free plug for this reason. I met all of the cast members for Horror on the Orient Express in a chat there. We played the Necropolis.
Wow.
And it was me scouting players. And then one player in particular, his name is Martin. He knows what he did. We were posting shelfies in a channel about what we have for game books, and I posted mine, and the box set for Horror on the Orient Express is there. And he goes, I want to play that one. That's the one I want to play. And I was like, Martin, it's a campaign. It's years in the making. It would take me months to spool up and be prepared for it. And his response was something like, well, you didn't say no. And so I gathered some of the people that played in the Necropolis, and we decided that we would want to be around each other twice a month for 4 to 8 hours for the next 2 or 3 years. And that's where it started. So it can happen just like that. I don't do casting calls usually. I go pick people. I find people, I listen to them on other shows, I play pickup games with them, and I'm like, that person's really good at what they do. They stay in character. Maybe they're a little crazy. Maybe they burn down grandma's house, whatever the case may be. But if they bring a good energy, then yeah, I'm totally interested in talking to them. And we do a lot of one-shots and stuff like that too, which is a great time to test people out and see how they play.
Okay, thank you. Now, there was another question here in the front.
I've actually developed two, but I'll just...
Oh, all right.
Like any good insanity, you would hope to.
We're on the topic of casts and things, and this one's probably mainly aimed at you because you do guests. How do you pick your guests? How do you know how they're going to sound? Do you worry about that?
So one particularity about the Glorantha community is like it's a fairly tight-knit community. Like I said, I came to it around like 2019 or something. But a lot of those people have known each other because they've been going to conventions, including like Glorantha specific convention, like RuneQuest conventions and stuff like that, for years. So often, I talk to somebody and they mention somebody else that would be a good guest, and it's like, oh yeah, I've known this guy for like since 1983 or whatever. So we pick guests mostly from like who they are and what they can bring to the show, like the topic that they know, the book they wrote or whatever. I don't worry too much about the sound quality. We interviewed some guests that had horrible sound quality, but that's where I sort of, had to go deep into learning about various plugins and filters, to pass on their voice track. I bought some like denoiser thing that uses AI, and it's magical. Like you press the button and all of a sudden all the background noise disappears. I'm like, ooh, sweet. So that's, so it's, I don't worry too much about that because I worry about the content first. So, yeah.
And were there any other questions right now? Any burning? Okay. Great. Let's move on. So, have you noticed that the show has developed or changed over time? Or has the structure that you initially set up just continued and that's still what you do?
Seth?
Everybody's looking at Seth.
Well,
Heard from you in a little while.
like I said, I'm mostly YouTube. For
Well,
me,
that's okay because you're still putting together a show full of content and thoughts and discussion. So tell us about your YouTube.
my show pretty much within the first year, I didn't start with a plan. I had no freaking idea what I was going to do when I started. And all of the things that I became known for kind of organically happened. And they're supposed to be for one show or one episode, and it worked, so I just kind of kept it. So I developed this cast of characters that's just me and fake mustaches and whatnot that stuck around. And had I known at the time that I was committing to a character that I was going to have to keep performing for years, I wouldn't have done them the way that I did them. But that's just, they worked out. So once I found my rhythm, and it's pretty much just stuck to it. So of my core 4 characters and my format of how I'll do a review or approach a thing. I guess the only thing that's really evolved in the past few years is with YouTube, the title cards are so freaking critically important that you want it to be visible to somebody that's just kind of scrolling through on their phone at high speed. So it's like, it's got to look catchy, but it's also got to have text that they can see. And the timestamp is in the bottom corner, so you can have any text there because it'll be covered up by however long the video is, and like all this dumb crap. So those have gotten better. And with equipment, with YouTube, the least important thing is your camera, which is the least intuitive thing, and that is the opposite of what a lot of people say. If you shoot on your phone, cool. I want an Any Award using my phone. So obviously the camera doesn't count. Matt Colville says that you should use 60 frames per second. I'm not doing explosions. I'm not doing football. I'm not doing fast wipes. It's me sitting in a stationary position with a camera on a tripod. 24 frames a second worked for Casablanca. It'll work for me sitting in front of a tripod.
Fair enough. Yes, applaud the man.
Nice.
60 frames a second looks weird.
It does.
Well, it does, but 60 frames a second is for like
it's the
high speed. Like I'm like,
Yeah.
"Hwah, hwah," and like that works. I'm literally sitting in a chair, much like this one, and I'm mostly trying to remember like stop slouching. Oh, I've CGI'd, really poorly CGI'd some explosions in some, but it's still in front of a stationary camera because it's by myself. I don't have a cameraman. And then if you are looking for cameras, the big trick is it needs to have an external mic thing. There's a lot of great cameras out there that for some reason they think they should use the onboard mic. The most expensive camera in the world's onboard mic sucks. This is a rule.
No, I totally agree.
Like $30,000 camera, the microphone that's built in sucks.
Yeah.
So make sure it's one that can jack in. But once I figured out my groove, it pretty much just became honing it. But at first, I had no freaking idea what I was going to do, and that's pretty much the whole story of my channel right there.
And you said you created your characters, and maybe going back, you might have done it differently. But I have a feeling you probably let them develop so that you were a little happier with them, or.
I would never have done Dweeble's hair that way.
Okay. We're talking like aesthetics.
Yeah. Because I have to use like all the gel that I own to slick my hair like this.
Fair enough.
Gross. And I thought if I did it once, it would be funny. And that was 4 years ago. And it's gross. So
now you have a part of your production budget that is just hair product.
Gel.
Yeah. So that and Jack's voice, I had to slowly change because at first he was just a bit part. So he talked a lot more like Dr. Girlfriend from the Venture Brothers, you know? It was like really deep. Well, then I would do a 4-minute monologue, and I can't do this for much longer than right now. So I had to kind of tone down. So those are the changes.
Okay. Does anybody else feel like they experienced an arc that they want to share with us?
So same thing as Seth. Like when I started, I had no idea what I was doing. But one notable thing, you were talking about being evergreen. That's one thing. At the beginning of the show, we had like a news section at the beginning of the episode, and then the main topic. And we dropped the news section after a while because we figured if somebody wants to listen back to one topic, we don't want them to have to sit or skip through 20 minutes of outdated news. So,
we definitely had a huge arc. I talked about this just a few minutes ago, but we started the podcast as a Twitch channel. And we really thought that was, at least I really thought that was going to be what the show, where we got listeners, was on Twitch. But then, like I said, we had 7 people, and on a Twitch channel, you've got to start on time. A few of us were very invested in it, and a few of us were really not. They were just coming to hang out and play a game. And when those people didn't show up on time, it drove me batty, and I was just miserable to my friends. Calling people, you got to get on, and my anxiety is ramping up, and it was just a nightmare. And we lasted like 4 weeks or something doing that. And I said, we got to kill this Twitch thing, because it's either going to kill me or I'm going to kill you guys.
You aged 10 years in 4 weeks.
I really did. It was terrible. It was terrible. But once we dropped that Twitch thing, then we were just, we would record the show. I'd record it on OBS, and then we post it to YouTube, and then post the podcast. That really made a big change. And then more recently, we've actually started doing shorter episodes. Most actual plays are, an hour and a half minimum, some of them up to 4 hours. And we found that we were losing a bit of narrative because we were getting a little lazy. And with so many people, when we were switching scenes, some groups of people would just not be heard from for big chunks of time, which is not good for them as players and for the story. So more recently, we've gone to, rather than recording one roughly hour and a half show a week, we record 2 45 minutes. And release it twice a week. So we still have the same amount of content, but we're much tighter in what we do. And the other thing is we don't edit. We actually play and we record what happens, and that's it. I do some minor editing for quality, but I don't edit for narrative at all. So what we do in that 45 minutes is what gets aired. So we've gotten
Which has been
better.
Interesting.
It is interesting when people do stupid stuff. You did it. That's it. There's no going. We're not editing that shit out. It's there. It definitely, it really tightened up our narrative process as we're live. And I think it makes for a better listen. But that's, over a year and a half, we got from a 2.5 hour Twitch stream to a 45-minute episode twice a week. And I think we're better storytellers because of it.
Yeah. It feels really good to me now. Mm-hmm. Everything happens so quickly. And
yep.
Yeah. So I want to go back to something, Seth, that you said about your YouTube labels. You didn't say labels. Whatever.
Title cards.
Title cards. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. How do you approach social media? I know it's a big question, but how?
Very carefully.
Very carefully. Tell me more, Ludo.
No, I don't know. I just set up accounts for the podcast on the usual social media stuff, and I try to post, when the episodes get released, a couple of other bullshit in the middle, and that's it. Really, I don't have a social media strategy.
Okay, so you find that because your audience is so focused, you don't really need that to get people listening to your show.
Well, there's that. Well, we try to grab the newcomers, because that's one of the goals of the podcast, which is to make it easier to get started with in Glorantha, especially there's the new RuneQuest line of games. So there's a bunch of newcomers to the world, and they sometimes get intimidated about the amount of lore. So we try to get newcomers. What I find mostly is that you sort of have to go wide. You're going to grab a few people on Reddit, a few people on Twitter, a couple on Mastodon, some on Facebook. So it's like every single social media you're not on, you're missing out on a part of the audience. But then it also means you have 6 different social media to juggle with.
Another full-time job.
Yeah, which is annoying as fuck. But yeah.
Anyone else approaches to social media?
So I actually started with I'm a novelist, so it got with when you write a book, and all of a sudden you've got to become a social media expert overnight, and authors are just known for being absolute social extroverts. That's really a strong suit there. So it's the big things to remember, with YouTube. One of my big advices that I always say is the key to it. Above all the technical stuff, above everything else, the key is you. People will go to your first video because it's over a topic that they find interesting. They go to your second video because they liked you, and that's really it. So that's why I can get people to watch games that they've never once thought about playing, because they know that they just like watching me ramble or stuff, or they know that I have a certain integrity with my reviews or whatever it is. So your social media is the same thing. If you do social media to where all it is you're self-promoting, nobody cares. Even your fans get bored if all it is of like, hey, I got a new episode, boom, and then like 5 days later when the next one's like, got a new episode, boom, and that's literally the only interaction. No one cares. So choose which social media is your strong suit. As I said, there's like 9 million platforms. You cannot possibly do them all. If you're good at Instagram, do Instagram. If you're good at Facebook, do Facebook. I chose Twitter, and then I'll be going back to Facebook. But kind of get your system down. So like, like share some memes, interact with people, do your stuff, and then periodically in the middle of that, be all like, hey, new episode. And the reason you do that is you want to have total strangers find you interesting and like, hey, this person's pretty cool. And all of a sudden, periodically, it's like, hey, check out this new episode of my podcast or my show or whatever it is. And they'll start doing it. And they start sharing it with other people. And that's the magic of social media. And if all your social media is a self-promotion, it is an absolute waste of time because nobody gives a shit. So, but make one where it's about you. Because even if it is your channel one, that's why people follow like the KFC Twitter, because it's entertaining and it's fun. We like that. Or there was the El Royo signs that you always see, that one Tex-Mex place, known worldwide because they got some really badass signs that they like to do. So it's the same thing. Make your social media a new way of getting people to like you, and then introduce them to what it is that you also do on the side. And don't try to be on 90 platforms. You'll kill yourself.
Okay, we in our podcasts have been deciding how to move forward with our social media. And so hearing you say what you just said about not just getting on there to promote, but offering content that people want to consume, and being yourself, that jives with where we've been ending up with in our own discussions.
Yeah,
we have a lot of work to do. So
my day job what actually pays me is in marketing. I create content for marketing, and like I'm sure you've all heard the old adage: the carpenter's roof leaks and the cobbler's kids don't have shoes. I suck at my own social media. I'm terrible at it. But everything that Seth said, I agree with 100%. Create meaningful content, and then give people some, your stuff along with that. If you're going to try and do social media as a marketing tool, that's definitely the way to go. Tell a compelling story, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be an actual story, but give something that people care about. Say something interesting, say something funny, whatever it is, and then sprinkle your self promotion throughout that.
Thanks.
And actually one other thing. There's going to be other podcasts. There's going to be other channels. There's going to be that. Mm-hmm. Technically, on a very technical sense, they're your competitors. Do not treat them that way. A lot of this is all community, and so like follow them, interact with them, laugh at their jokes, share their posts, become friends with them, go on their show as a guest, but don't treat it like. Okay, if anybody listens to another show, that means that's time they're not listening to me. And there's a lot of people that come into it, whether it be in writing or any of the other stuff, where that's truly how they treat it. And the communities are actually really supportive of each other. And so like when you get in your social media space, follow and interact with all the social medias of all the other channels out there. And that will boost your audience. Because they'll also be like, hey, they're cool because they're chatting with so-and-so. And, they're like both these big time people shows. So definitely interact with all the others out there. Don't try to be a little island of like, my people, and you don't listen to anybody else. Don't do that.
Be a part of the community.
Yeah, here.
Yeah. So I have just a couple more questions I want to ask, and then I will open it up to all of you before we wrap up. So Art, earlier you talked about something that was a big challenge for us and for you particularly, getting our podcast started, just figuring out how to balance the players' schedules and personalities with our technical needs. So I'd like to just ask the rest of you to tell us about a challenge, a hill you had to climb, a bump in the road in your process, something that you had to overcome to move forward with your project?
I think March 2020 was a really difficult time.
Yeah.
So I was on the road for work at the time, one of my last trips for work, because I'd not be going back out on the road for that job ever again. And I think the toughest part for us was coming home from a work trip and realizing that Friday is a recording day and that none of the people that I've been gaming with for years can come over. We all have to begin recording it remotely as soon as possible, because when you're putting out shows regularly, consistency is the sexiest part of what you do. That's why people keep coming back, is because you keep producing, because you have something that they want. At least some people do. And so if you're doing that, like we were pedaling at that pace, we have to figure out how to record remotely. So sound's going to change, editing is going to change, process will change. And it's not like, no matter how many episodes you see me release or the show release, there's no army of production assistants behind me to figure all that out. It's 2:00 on a Thursday and game is tomorrow. How are we doing this? And so that's the toughest part for me, was to figure out, okay, well, how do we record remotely and how do we get it done right? Do all the players have mics they can use at home properly? The answer, of course, is no.
There's always one that's got a bad internet connection.
It's not just that. The guy with the person with bad internet connection also records with a headset on, and you can hear the plastic creak when it goes back and forth. You're going to have to deal with that sound too. Yeah, right? So I think that's probably one of the toughest things we had to overcome, but we did overcome it. It is possible. And did we slow down or miss any episodes? No, but the sound quality changed. So that's key for us. Once the audience gets used to how you sound and your sound radically changes, there are burbles in the in the pipe at that point too, because something has changed. Now, luckily, we were very fortunate that our audience was very forgiving. That they understood, listen, the world has been turned upside down, and so things are going to sound different. So when those challenges come, you just take a breath and begin to work the problem. At least that's the way how my mind worked on it, right? I was fortunate enough to have players that were willing to keep going.
Yeah, and I'm so impressed because I actually thought that yes was going to be a no. Yes, we missed we didn't make all of our episodes in March 2020, but we persevered. But you were able to pull it together and get your players on board and just move forward.
Yeah, I'm a madman.
Yeah.
There is the possibility, because when you were asking a question, I'm like, no, there's not any big hurdle. But I realized this is because I really do this just for fun. Like, I don't have a Patreon, I don't have marketing, I don't have ads or anything. Like, I've got zero revenue from this podcast. It's just like I'm doing it for fun. And if anything's not fun, I just don't do it. If anything's not if it's like if you have a regular role-playing game, if you have a player that is feeling not so good this week and cancels, that's fine. It's like it's more important than just playing. And so same thing for the podcast. If we're gonna maybe once or twice we skipped an episode because that month was way too busy for us, or we're sick or away or whatever. If there is some amount of work for graphics, editing or whatever, I tend to time box it. I'm like, I've got this much time. After that, it's like whatever, it's going out in that form. So I'm not basically putting any pressure on myself to do anything right. I just go I'm making a podcast for fun, and I'm not gonna do it if it's not fun, because I'm not getting paid yet. So.
Fair enough. All right, so the last question I would like to ask you is this. I want to know, sometimes you come out of an episode and it feels fine. Sometimes you're shaking your head. Sometimes it just feels amazing. And I want to know, what are those elements of the episodes that you feel are the most rich and compelling, that just make you feel like everything came together? That's a deep one.
I mean, I can take that one. For me, it's all about the story. Like I said, we're not editing anything. It's not about anything that I'm doing. It's about us making a great story. And when we've all had moments in that episode where we've all had a thing that's been impactful and everyone's been supporting everyone else, and the show ends on a great note, that's success for me. Like you, we're not making any money on this thing either. It's just a love of telling stories. So when I feel like I've been entertained for that time that we've been recording the show, then yeah, that's it for me.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm there with you. I mean, storytelling, we're going to have a different kind of answer than some of the rest of the panel. But tell me, for some of your other formats, other approaches. Well, we have story. Tell me other answers to my question before I trip over my own tongue anymore.
So since I don't do live, all my stuff is scripted and has like an insane amount of post and images and costume changes and blah 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 blah. Yeah. 9 out of 10, if I'm like, this is the best ever, no one will watch it. And the ones that like tend to pick up are like, sometimes I'm like, yeah, this is one of those crappy ones that'll just kind of fall into obscurity. That's the one people watch. And that's usually the one that I know has so many technical flaws, or I flub something that I want it to vanish in obscurity. And that's the one that was like, oh, I love your video about that. Like, oh God, why won't that one die? But then if I really bust my butt for one that I think is above and beyond, it's like the least performer ever. So I'm the worst judge.
So sad.
I'm the worst judge of what people like, man. I don't know.
Okay. Mike, what about you?
What about me, really?
What about you?
Yeah, I guess what makes things great are the people I get to tell stories with. Mm-hmm. And I think over time, over the campaigns, getting an opportunity to see not just characters.
Oh my God, really? That's my wife.
Tell her hi. Yeah. I don't think it's just the arc that you get to see the character go through. For me, it's the arc of watching a player get better at what they do and more impactful in the story. I think that's really rewarding as a show, from the showrunner chair, from the keeper's chair, stuff like that. It's really rewarding watching a player who couldn't do a thing in character 2 weeks ago, 2 months ago, 2 years ago, because they're not connected enough, and then watching them break through that and see them develop. That's really fulfilling.
Even more than telling the story, seeing your characters grow or your players grow and succeed.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
you bet.
That's awesome.
That's great.
Ludo, do you want to? I'm not going to leave you out.
Yeah, okay. Like our format is mostly guests, interviews. Mm-hmm. So, it feels good when the conversation flows naturally between us and the guests, when we don't have to, pull the answers out of them, and we don't have to sort of go through awkward silences and whatnot. Mm. But most of the time, like Seth says, it has nothing to do with how good an episode performs or not. Generally, because I suck so bad at self-promotion and social media and all that.
But you're good at self-deprecation.
I'm very good. I'm French, so yeah, I'm French. So and so I'm even bad at self-deprecation. So the episode goes well basically when we have a guest who is good at that and promotes it. Like when we get people like, for example, Lindy Beige, who has like a very popular historical warfare YouTube channel, then that episode does like 5 times better than most of the other ones, because like Yeah.
And I will say, I asked about what you feel is rich and compelling and not which episodes are the most successful on purpose, because I just really wanted to know what was most fulfilling for you in the work that you do. And I know sometimes an episode will take off and sometimes it won't, but that doesn't always mean, especially in Seth's case, that it was the work you were the most proud of. But obviously we all do this because it's something we're passionate about. And so that was the question I wanted to end on. But I will open it up to the rest of you if you have any. Wait, do we clap before or after the questions? Sorry. Please give a round of applause to our wonderful, I don't know. It's my first moderation, but I really appreciate all of you, and I would love to give the audience a chance to ask any more questions that you might have. Yeah.
I want to know, because maybe I'm wrong, but starting out, you feel like it's maybe just you and mom who's listening to what you're doing. How long?
My mom hates my show.
Well, I hope
Yeah, my mom won't listen to my show. Nope.
Mom, if you're listening to this,
And that's a good thing.
How long did it take you to get to the point where you went, okay, I might have something here?
I'll let you know when I get there.
Ouch. No, I understand. Absolutely.
I think when people who I appreciate in the community who helped me when I was starting out with the questions I had, when they came and gave me feedback 4, 6, 8, 10 episodes down, and they heard, oh, hey, someone talked to me about this episode and they said it was really good, so congratulations. Like, that's huge. Peer appreciation in the community is really important, much to Seth's earlier point about following people within the community and not seeing adversarial colors or walls between people. That's really critical too, because being in this portion of the role-playing community is very small. And so it's really important, even if it's just mom that likes the episode, that's great. It's really important to go listen to somebody else's show and say, hey, that was fantastic. When it happened for me was probably halfway through the first season, when we got sort of like, okay, well, we released the first 2 episodes and like no one is listening. So when is someone going to listen? And then I think one of our first listeners that was a guy in Cuba who emailed me. He was like, hey, I live in Cuba and you guys are great. And I was like, it's one sentence. That's all I need. Thanks.
Yep.
You know, that was where it started for me.
I can take one or two more.
I just want to
absolutely.
quickly answer that question. The first time that I actually realized that I thought, you know what, we might have something here, was actually last year when some strangers came up and said that they liked the show. I was just freaking blown away. It's those.
Are you pointing at the strangers?
Yes, I am pointing at the strangers.
No longer strangers?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then I live on my couch.
Yes.
So yeah, working full time, having friends, family, playing games, planning them out. Like, how do you manage burnout?
Adderall.
Alcohol.
Chocolate?
Yeah.
I like to mix up what it is. I did start having my burnout point, I guess, about 2 years ago, because I was releasing once a week, and for me, an episode takes a solid week to do. So it was pretty much I would post a video, and then I'm now maintaining the wave of new comments and everything while I'm writing the script and working on the next one. It was 7 days a week, all day, and I could not maintain. And so I did slow down my schedule, and I also try to diversify what topics I cover, because if I start doing the same thing over and over again, my ADD kicks in and I get bored, and then it just becomes painful to do. So that's why I've always like every week or every episode I will be doing something totally different than the one before it, just to keep me from feeling like I'm in a rut. But if you're doing a show, whether it's once a month or once a week or whatever, it shouldn't be something that becomes a burden, because it will reflect in what you're doing. And if you're not doing it as something that you enjoy, then you shouldn't be doing it. Just it should be something that's at least enjoyable to you. So that change something up if that starts kicking in, or try to put measures in place to keep that from kicking in as long as possible. So,
Yeah. I've talked about how we don't do any post-production editing for narrative, which we talk about as a benefit to our show. A lot of it is because I just don't have time to do that. So, like Seth said, if you're not enjoying it, don't do it. And someone said earlier that one of the more important things that you can do with a podcast is be regular about your content. I think Mike was talking about that. Whatever your schedule is, stick to that schedule, but really put some time and effort into thinking about what's going to be a sustainable schedule for you.
Yeah.
If it's once a month, it's once a month. Then just do it once a month. If you find that you can do that, then increase it later. But if you start going, okay, I'm going to do this twice a week, I'm going to put out a show twice a week, and then all of a sudden you miss 2 weeks, you're going to lose a ton of listeners. So find a schedule that works for you, make it fun, make it sustainable.
So if it's okay, I'd really love to stop right there because I like the idea of ending with 2 comments, one after another, that essentially said, you have to love this if you're going to do it. That's what makes it worthwhile. And we talked about what tech to get, and we talked about what social media to use and all sorts of other things. But if you have something to say, if you're with people that you have a sense of community and you can say things together, have a podcast. Thank you so much to all of you. And thank you for your questions, your very insightful questions.
And thank
thanks
you,
Call
Ellie.
it a night.
Thank you.
No.